the most dangerous day for me is the day that you realize that structure's disappeared, your identity has been challenged, your purpose is maybe not once what it was. Pretty much everybody that I've met, those that have put the work in and those that haven't, often have their version of the most dangerous day. And it's kind of that kind of, is this it feeling? It's kind of like, what does this mean?
Do you want to be better with money but dread the math? I get it. That's why this show is not focused on math, the markets, meme stocks, or even economic predictions. It is focused on how money fits into your daily life, from having healthy money conversations to caring for an aging parent. I'm Karen Coyne, certified financial planner professional and your host of Money Without Math. Join us for conversations that are practical, sometimes philosophical, and always fresh. Learn more about me at raymondjames.com/clarity and be sure to subscribe.
You've scrimped, you've saved, you've hit your numbers, and then you finally do it, you get to retire. And yet you feel lost, maybe out of sorts, disappointed. It happens. Because retirement isn't just about hitting numbers. It's actually a very complicated, complex life transition. It's major. And we think it should be easy, I guess, because we're not working anymore. But that's often really not the case. And so to dig into retirement without the math, we are joined today by our guest, Dan Haylett. He's a financial planner and retirement coach. He's also the host of the Humans versus Retirement podcast and the author of the recently released The Retirement You Didn't See Coming. Welcome, Dan.
Karen, it's so lovely to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Can't wait for this conversation.
Yes, and thank you for joining us all the way from, I'm going to try to say it, Malden.
Yes, well, that's what a wonderful British accent you have. I love it. Fantastic.
I really wanted to Frenchify it, though, and say Melville.
Yeah.
No. So near London, joining us from near London today.
Not far, yeah.
Not far. So, okay, Dan, you sent me a copy of your book. Thank you. And this is right up the alley of Money Without Math, as you can imagine. And right off the bat, I wanted to start with something that you open with, which is the most dangerous day of retirement. Tell us about that.
Yeah. This isn't baked in actual science, right? I haven't actually found out the most dangerous day, but I think I kind of have a little bit. And this is through conversations with people. This is through understanding the emotional journey that they go on. And I say that the most dangerous day in retirement is probably day number 182. And for everyone getting their calculators out now, doing kind of the quick maths, that's 6 months in. And look, again, it's not an exact science. It might be 3 months, 6 months, a year. But let's just say day 182 is the most dangerous day in retirement. And what I mean by that is that it's the day that kind of structure slips away. It's a day that quietly appears. It doesn't like hit you like a, like something like an XX missile. It doesn't like, shake you to the bones. It just quietly creeps up on you. And you might find yourself on day 182, which, by the way, probably is a Tuesday. It's in the morning, and you might find yourself opening up the fridge, trying to look for inspiration from the Greek yogurt or something like that. The dog's looking at you going, what the hell are you doing in my house all of this time? You're looking at the dog thinking, when should we go for a walk? This is the most dangerous day for me, is the day that you realize that structure's disappeared, your identity has been challenged, your purpose is maybe not once what it was. And it's the day that does get to people, even when they do a lot of work into what their retirement life looks like. Pretty much everybody that I've met, those that have put the work in and those that haven't, often have their version of the most dangerous day. And it's kind of that kind of, is this it feeling? It's kind of like, what does this mean? What I try and say to people is that there's a recognition that this day will come. And it's perfectly human to have this day because you've left a lot behind and you're transitioning into a new what should be wonderful phase of life. But with that transition comes a huge amount of pressure, a huge amount of worry and weight on your shoulders about a lot of stuff. And, because it creeps up on you, it's something that you need to understand, be able to think about, deal with, talk about. But there are really good little hacks, really good things that you can do during your retirement journey, during living in retirement, during planning for it, that can hopefully make this dangerous day maybe even not appear. But as I said, it probably does. And when it does, you can make it go away pretty quickly, or you can learn how to deal with it a lot better.
Mm-hmm. It's something that, because we're not working anymore, do you think that's a big part of why people often think, oh, this is going to be easy? I've hit my numbers. That was the hard part.
Yeah, your title of your podcast is brilliant, right? Money without the math. This is, people think that retirement is a maths problem. So they solve the maths problem and then they think everything else will fall into place. And so because they've hit their number, they believe that life will be fine. But what they don't realize that by leaving work, you've actually set yourself on I think we're going to touch into kind of the emotional journey of retirement, but you set yourself on a journey that involves quite a lot of grief, i.e. quite a lot of loss, loss of identity, loss of purpose, loss of structure, loss of business card, loss of inbox, loss of calendar. Think of all the things that we might lose or needs to be transitioned as we move from work into retirement, or even from full-time career into part-time, work, whatever that might look like. So yeah, there is this real big misconception that I'll get the money thing sorted, right? I'll get the maths thing sorted. I'll get the spreadsheet sorted and the financial plan and everything like that. And that will give me everything I need. But there is a big myth in retirement that the numbers will make you safe, and they don't. They remove financial fear, but they don't actually tell you, what's going to give you purpose to pull back the duvet. They don't tell you how to answer that question, or what do you do when you're retired and you stumble over that question because you just don't know what you do anymore. They don't help you put structure into life. So, I think because people focus so much on the money, it actually stops them and prevents them from doing the real good work that they need to do to live a fulfilling retirement.
Mm-hmm. Is that how you became a coach as well as a financial planner?
Yeah, I had a couple of really. I was fortunate enough to have a couple of really eye-opening clients early on in my financial planning career. In that, I thought it was about the numbers, right? When I first started, it was, get the numbers sorted, Dan, do wonderful cash flow planning and modeling, and create these wonderful plans, get the right investment portfolio, talk about risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was lucky enough for one of my really early clients to be a very successful guy, wonderful couple, lovely family. And, everything was right with them. One of the most perfect plans, Monte Carlo simulation would have, was fantastic. They were never going to run out of money. I'd done a little bit of work on their plans with them, i.e. what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, but nothing in depth really. And I remember meeting them 6 months later, and they both walked into the office, and when you can tell the vibe is very different to what you thought it was going to be. They looked a bit disheveled. They weren't really talking to one another. They looked like they're aged a bit. Mm. And I remember sitting down with them and I was like, is everything okay? And they both just outpoured, no, it's not, wow. It's not okay. We've really struggled. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm anxious. I'm still anxious about the money. Our relationship has, although we're not on the verge of divorce, our relationship has definitely taken a backward step because we haven't thought about what that looks like. And I remember sitting there going, Dan, my team and I have put in work to create something quite meaningful for them in terms of what the numbers look like. And it's all for nothing. And Andy and Tina, who are actually in my book as one of the case studies, I suppose, if you will, that I cite in there. And I thought, well, he's worked so much of his life, 30 to 40 years. She's done an amazing job working and bringing up the family. They've created a wonderful life together, yet they've worked for this moment and they're not living. And so there must be other things that we can do. And that started my journey into more about humans and behaviors and psychology around retirement, money, and transitions in general, which then led to this kind of thing. Well, actually, there is we need to coach people during this stage. We need to combine the money with the meaning. We need to focus on life as well as the spreadsheets, because if they're both in harmony and we're talking about them in conjunction, then that gives them the best chance to take advantage of the money that they've worked for, the time they've got left, and the freedom that they've always wanted. And I didn't want another conversation like that. I mean, I've had some since. I haven't been, but I was thinking, I don't ever want that conversation again. I want to do better for them.
Yes.
So yeah.
And also, though, how bittersweet and fortunate in a way, bittersweetly fortunate that they did feel comfortable enough to have that outpouring with you, so that you could both address it, or both, all of you together, address it. And otherwise, imagine if they hadn't shared that with you. I'm sure you've thought about that as well.
Yeah, and I think that, I always, I always kind of badged myself as a financial planner, even from the very early days, right? I never led entirely with the money. So I always try to have, conversations about, meaning and what you want to do with your time and everything. But that made me think, so I suppose that made them feel comfortable, because I've had some conversations with them previously. But it also made me realize that it wasn't enough. It was, it was very surface level, and there were other things that I needed to address, pull out, speak to them about, ask questions, have conversations with them, in order to make sure that they feel like that they're comfortable to spend their money, to live their life, etc. And it wasn't a one and done thing. That made me think about the whole coaching element and going through different coaching courses to go, this is kind of an ongoing coaching piece, right? This isn't solvable in an hour's meeting or a 3-month, program with people. This is a massive, massive life event that requires ongoing conversations, requires huge amounts of flexibility, and an element of uncertainty to it. So we need to be guides in their life, is what I would say, rather than just a planner or an advisor. And that's kind of where it's all stemmed from.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's interesting when I think about, retirement, like traditionally what was associated with that as I was coming into the field, which was about 25 years ago. Typically it was just you're done. On this day, you're retired. Cold turkey, done. And early in my career, I similarly had, a couple clients that really helped change my view on what successful retirement could and might look like for folks. And one of those was someone who was she had a phased plan of how she was going to take her foot off the gas and kind of scale her business and into retirement. And now there's so many different ways that people are approaching retirement, which I think is also really exciting. We've talked about recently on this show, portfolio careers and, kind of reinvention. And I know this is also something that ties in very nicely with things that you address in your book as it relates to the emotional journey of retirement. So what can you tell us about that without giving the entire book away?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're wonderful observations and work that you've been doing, and I entirely agree. I think, my starting point around the emotional journey of retirement is a bit like you were saying. It's retirement has moved on, or this transition, this second half of life, third act, whatever we want to call it. People that are 50 plus, 55 plus, for instance, are retiring or entering into this phase of life like no other person has ever entered into this phase of life in our history. Their parents done it differently, their grandparents done it differently. Retirement is a modern thing, right? It's an invention that we invented as humans, and a lot of financial planning is still based on kind of an industrial age retirement. You get to 65, you hit a number, you retire, and you're thankful for what you've got. And quite simply, over a very quick period, I think over the last 20 or 30 years, retirement now has moved on significantly, or this phase of life for everybody. And if we couple that with the fact that you go back to, the generation before us, their money situation was very different. They had defined benefit or final salary pensions, so they had more guaranteed income. They didn't have to worry about their money as much as what a modern retiree has to worry about it.
Right.
So the emotional aspect of, worrying about our money actually has caused, over the last 20 years, the data is telling us that there is a really chronic underspending problem with people with, with a hard won pot of money. Either they've worked hard to save their money and they really struggle in spending it because they don't want to, they don't know how they're going to live for. They don't know what returns are going to be. They don't know what inflation is. We've added all of this uncertainty into their life. And so their emotional journey is now so much more than it was before. So when you think of it, like that, it wasn't that long ago that people were forced to retire, right? There was kind of, mandatory retirement. You hit 65, you were done, right? You met at the door with your pass and your box, or you were told to, leave the factory and off you go. So when I look at what the emotional journey of retirement looks like, and I've taken some inspiration from a number of different works here, but mostly the inspiration come from the Kubler-Ross change curve of grief. And two ladies, I don't know their first names, but Mrs. Kubler, Mrs. Ross, they looked at the emotional journey that people go through when they are in bereavement, when they lose a family or a loved one. And it was really interesting because I looked at that and thought, well, actually, these are the types of emotions that I see a lot of my clients going through. And that was the point I made at the start of when we had this conversation. Retirement is a time of loss, right? So for me, when you look at the emotional journey of retirement, it's often one that involves a bit of shock at the start. You're like, oh my God, what is this? I think retirement shock has been well documented and publicized. It's this kind of thing. Then you enter into a bit of elation, i.e. the honeymoon phase. It feels wonderful. You're going on holiday. You're getting up when you want. You have lunch. You walk the dog whenever you want, etc. And then maybe the most dangerous day in retirement comes, right? It's kind of like, I've been through the shock. I've had the elation. And now I'm like, really? Kind of, what does this mean? And you go through maybe a 2 or 3 stage downward journey where you're going, well, I'm a bit frustrated. I'm uneasy about my life. And at the bottom of what I think is the emotional journey is what I've called doubt. And this is the point where a lot of people go back to work, not because they want to, but because they don't know what else they're doing. They doubt their decisions. They don't know whether they, and this is the bit I think Andy and Tina were in when I saw them. They had doubt about what they'd done and why they'd done it because they hadn't planned for it properly. And that bottom bit in the Kubler-Ross change curve is depression. And all the statistics that are coming out now about people in retirement suggest that they are much more likely to be diagnosed with depression than people that aren't. I think the numbers I'm seeing are like 40 to 50% more likely to be diagnosed with depression than if you're not retired. So it shows you how emotional and psychologically challenging the transition into retirement can be. But it's not all bad news, right? Because if we get to that point, then we can start thinking about how do we recalibrate? What does everyday life look like? How can we ignite our passions and how can we then flourish into a new way of living that is living every day, not just kind of a permanent holiday? What does our daily structure and routine look like? So what I try and say to people, this is more of a language and a permission rather than a journey. The curve isn't linear. You don't go through every stage and last 2 months in every stage. You might skip some. It might take 6 months to hit one. But what I've tried to do in the book is name them, explain them, and then let people know that if you're at that point, there's things that you can do to help yourself or to recognize that you're there. And it's perfectly normal because, loss tells us that you will go through these emotions as and when you kind of start to transition into a new way of life.
So for someone who maybe recently retired, let's say within the past year or so, and maybe they're still in that floundering phase, wondering, what have I done? What are some recommendations that you would make based on, some of those findings?
Yeah, I think we definitely need to get better at asking and answering different questions. We touched on how much is enough and that money question. I think we need to frame that kind of enough for what. And so what I try and say to people is there are 5 pillars, I call them, to a thriving retirement that will really help you navigate the emotional journey of this second half of life. So those 5 pillars are purpose, identity, relationships, structure, and well-being. And if we can think about those 5 things, i.e. what gives us, purpose to pull back the duvet in the morning, not change the world purpose. We don't have to all try and solve, world hunger or anything, but it'd be lovely if we all could. But this can be small purposes. This could be foundational level stuff, playing with grandchildren, writing a book, starting up a blog, thinking about that, consulting work that you've always wanted to do, volunteering at a particular charity, whatever this might look like for you, spending more time with your wife or your husband or your partner. So that's really important. I think we're in the middle of a bit of an identity crisis in general as a species. We've linked our identity to our job. We've linked our identity to productivity. And so it's very hard for people to actually, I think, know exactly who they are as an individual. And retirement shines a massive light on who you are and who you want to be. So, I think those are the questions. Who are you when you haven't got a full inbox? Who are you when your calendar isn't filled up for you? And who are you when you haven't got a business card to give out to someone that kind of asks those kind of questions? Relationships are important. I mean, there's studies out there, right? The Harvard study, etc., that tell us, in order to flourish in life, to have a long, happy life, relationships are the most important thing that we have, positive relationships. But it's also understanding that our relationships will change. Our relationships with our spouse, our partner, relationships with our children, relationships with our colleagues, they are going to be different. We need to work on them. We need to nourish them. We need to get new relationships with people. I say to people that are retirement, get different demographics. What you don't want to do is have relationships that all kind of die at the same time, right? And in the nicest possible way, right? I mean, you want to hang out with younger people. You want older friends. You want people, really expand your network. So yeah, structure's huge. Freedom without anything to do is just a blank canvas, and that really, really does get people anxious. For the first time in your life, you've probably got the ability to fill your diary with what's important to you, and if you don't know why or what, it can be hugely challenging. You can be paralyzed by the fact that you now need to make some of these decisions and choices. So work on that stuff. And then well-being, right? I mean, if you haven't got your mind and your body, then everything that you've worked for can be that can go. And some of that's out of our control. But we do see the research is saying that retirement shines a spotlight on some things that you haven't necessarily got a healthy relationship with, whether it's sleep or alcohol or work or busyness or whatever that looks like. When time is on your side, it shines a real big light on them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, you mentioned the dangerous day of retirement being roughly, 180 some days, 6 months in, but for some people it could be like 2 weeks in, day 15, much sooner.
Yeah. Again, I've said the 6 month thing, but I've had people that have gone, oh my God, like really early on into this. I've had people that have seemed amazing for 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden it's hit them. Like any grief or loss, isn't it? If you think, if you put it in that frame, some people grieve really early on, and some people it hits, at some point later on. But what I do know is if we know this information and we can put some work in behind it, it gives everybody the best chance to be able to navigate the journey.
So you mentioned some hacks earlier. Is that for someone who is rounding the corner on retirement? Maybe they're 5 years out, something like that. Or tell us a little bit about what you had in mind when you were mentioning, some of these hacks that we can use so that that we can, turn some of these challenges into a positive transition.
Yeah, listen. In an ideal world, we would have a really good kind of runway preparation period into this, right? But so. I think if people are listening and they are 3 to 5 years away and they want to start thinking, then well done, you are ahead of the game. Because a lot of people, they do this too late. They wait to retire and then decide to try and put some work in. And I always say that it's really challenging if you're focusing on retiring from something. What you need to focus on is retiring to something and with something. So, so I would say one of the hacks is that, right? Start 3 to 5 years out from this. Figure out, what start to build different connections and relationships with people. Start weaning yourself off on the money issues as well. So focusing too heavy on the money is a massive problem. And people need to, I think, 3 years out, be spending 50% of their allocated time focusing on the non-financial elements of retirement.
50% of their time on the non-financial.
At least, I would say, right? I mean, if you're 3 years out from retirement and you're still worrying about your asset allocation, you're worrying about your spending plans, you're worrying about if you've got enough, then, that's not, that's not right. I mean, you need to be putting some of those money things to bed to be able to do some of the real deep work about, what is it that me and my partner or spouse, if you've got one, what do we want to do together at that time? Because we've never spent this amount of time together before, ever. So What does that look like? What really lights me up? What do I really want to do with my time? And as I said, if you focus on those 5 areas and think about those and just start jotting down some thoughts and some understanding and start prepping and planning for what that might look like. And then I would say that the runway into that is give yourself time to rest, give yourself time to reflect, and then give yourself time to re-engage is kind of what I would say. So as you kind of put your plan together, you enter into retirement. I don't think you need to hit this thing hard from day one. Rest your way into it. Understand that, you shouldn't feel guilty for doing nothing, right? You need to kind of get in there and feel the rhythm and feel what this looks like, and then start to plant some new seeds, start to re-engage, but have a plan to know what you're going to do during that journey. And I think, so I think having those 5 pillars, starting a bit earlier than what you would normally think, and then that key phrase, retiring with and to. So build habits now whilst you're still working. Figure out what the most important parts of work are to you. And by the way, for everybody I speak to, most of them are not financial. How are you going to replace them? Are you retiring with better habits around, your time and protecting it and your health and well-being? And then what are you going to retire to? And if you can kind of start jotting down on that framework, you're going to put yourself ahead of the game.
Yeah, 50%. That's great. So that could be everything from jotting it down, having conversations with your partner, to actually trialing some of these things, right? So if I think I've always been interested in ballroom dancing and that's what I want to do when I retire, and find a class, right?
I love that. Listen, do you know one of the happiest retirees experiment and fail, right? We need to get over the fact that we believe that when we get to a certain age in life that we should have all the answers. This is a time now of a new beginning. When you hit retirement, forget everything you've ever learned and go and experiment and fail, because now's the opportunity to do it. If you've always wondered about ballroom dancing, go and do it. After the first lesson, you might go, oh my God, I'm never going back. That was so bad. I don't want. That's cool. You rule that one out, and go and try something else. So experiment and fail is huge when it comes to this phase of life.
Yes, I love that. You said it's a time for new beginnings and experimentation is key. And I've observed the same thing with clients that are just open to trying new things, maybe being okay to say, yeah, that didn't work. Next. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
And that just brings me to one last thing that I did want to make sure that we address, which is how being a high achiever can backfire in retirement. And specifically, you mentioned a couple minutes ago about being okay with downtime, being okay with, your calendar maybe not being full, or maybe being okay with like, I just really sucked at something. I tried something new and I was atrocious. It was horrible. You've also, talked about, I think, or written about this, how high achievement can contribute to particular challenges in retirement.
I think it's one of the biggest challenges that people face in terms of the high achiever moving into the second half of life, because I think that there's an illusion I talk about in the book. I start the book with 10 illusions, and the last one is if you're not productive, you're wasting it. And I think the trouble with a high achiever is that they've often, in a modern society, busyness is achievement. And we've conditioned ourselves to kind of go, well, actually, productivity is the measure of success. And what a lot of those high achievers that have had, 50, 60, 80-hour weeks, that have been spoon-fed, i.e. they have a PA or they have a team behind them that have filled their calendar for them. They've, spent 3 hours a day in their inbox. They feel like, and I'm not saying they're not, but they feel important because they're doing this work. The shock that comes to them is this kind of emptiness, right? And it's a sense of guilt that they have. They don't know how to now navigate what success looks like when productivity isn't a thing anymore. So it can really backlash, because what I see people doing that haven't thought about that is they say yes to everything. And what they end up doing is that they fill their diary with stuff that actually they don't want to do, or that makes them unhappy, or they spend time with people that suck their energy out because they're uncomfortable with space. They're uncomfortable with stillness. As I think we've been conditioned, this modern world now has conditioned us to have this always on mentality, and time and space and, this kind of stillness, nothingness, quietness freaks us out, I think, a lot more than it ever has done. And I think for people that are, high achievers that have had productivity as their measure of success, struggle massively with that downturn.
And the research shows that. I mean, some of the most successful, they're prestigious, CEOs, attorneys, executives, et cetera, can really struggle with the transition.
Yeah. I mean, and actually, I think what I will say is that you don't have to be a high achiever, or to have productivity equal success. You don't have to be this big CEO, right? There's lots of people I see that have, because productivity equals success for so many people, busyness actually masks a lot of discomfort for people. You're entering to retirement now where you're going to strip that away.
Yeah.
And so it can backfire massively, because that's when this challenge comes in. But there are some really, as I said, really good things that we can start to think about.
Well, share one of those things with us.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on it, right? I think trialing it is massive. In those 3 to 5 years leading up to retirement, go away for 2 weeks and do nothing. Right? Just
nothing.
Nothing.
Lounge.
Get up, make breakfast when you want, lounge, stillness, try and get off social media. Don't watch too much telly, read some books. I've told people to do this, and it really does help them. It doesn't mean that they then go to like this life of nothingness, because nothingness is not good. But it's almost that thing where you go, I just want to experience no noise. I just want to get out in the wilderness and just go, do you know what? I'm just going to do nothing. My main jobs is to cook something and light the fire, maybe read a book, but just have that doubt. Get used to kind of having nothing again. Get used to not checking your emails. Do that 2 or 3 times over a 2 or 3 year period as you lead up to this, just to start getting yourself away from this constant productivity equals success measure. And if you can do that, you're going to put yourself in such the most amazing place when it comes to living in retirement.
That's great. And, for those, I can imagine someone listening saying, oh my gosh, I couldn't do that for 2 weeks, but maybe I could try it for a weekend, or maybe I could try it this Saturday, right?
Small steps. Absolutely. Yeah.
Dan, this has been wonderful. I wish that we could, I know that we could talk so much more about this topic. It's something that you're clearly deeply passionate about. It's something that I've observed, many of these similar occurrences over the years that I just feel like, we need to talk about. We need to talk. And that is also, again, part of that change that we've talked about, of how this whole landscape is shifting, is, this is being addressed. This is being talked about more. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So thank you for all the work that you're doing on that front.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on as a guest. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks again for listening. Please follow us on Spotify if you're not already, so you don't miss any future episodes. We'd also love for you to rate the show while you're there. Connect with us on social. Search Karen Coyne CFP on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. If you have feedback or if we can be of service in any way, please let us know. And now for the standard disclosures. Opinions expressed are those of Karen Coyne and not those of Raymond James Financial Services or Raymond James. Securities offered through Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors Incorporated. Clarity Planning is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services. Karen Coyne Financial Advisors, located at 12920 Connemara Drive, Suite 202, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21742. Phone 301-739-7002. Any opinions expressed by Dan Haylett are not necessarily those of Raymond James. Raymond James is not affiliated with, nor endorses Dan Haylett. This podcast is for informational purposes only.